Victory will really consist of a relatively stable government structure with reasonable security for the people. It isn't going to mean an end to insurgent or jihadist pressures, but it will mean there won't be sanctuaries or major elements of violence. And Afghanistan will not be a center for any major international terrorist group.
And so what sort of time frame, though, are you talking about?
That's a very good question, because at a minimum you can get progress in 12 to 18 months, but real success is probably going to take some 3 to 5 years. Now, if in that process you have doubled Afghan forces by, say, 2014, you have sharply cut reliance on NATO and ISAF forces. And much earlier, if you really treat the Afghan forces as partners, and the criticisms rarely extend to the Afghan National Army, then you have Afghans really conducting the raids, the searches in the areas. You have Afghans involved in planning and vetting the airstrikes. You're not seeing this as a military operation dominated from the outside. You're looking at a civil military operation which is being built up from the inside.
Dr. Cordesman, clearly a very well thought out strategy which seems terribly logical on paper. Given the reluctance to spend more money and have the long-term commitment in Washington right now, by your own logic, doesn't that suggest, well, then there's no point in doing it at all? This is just a continuation of an under-resourced campaign that hasn't worked over the last 8 years. If you don't get the up to 45,000 troops that you think are necessary, what is the point?
Well, let me note that that 45,000 was never my figure, and it came from a range which would be anywhere from, say, 10,000 to 40,000. People are multiplying out figures using, shall we say, mathematics that would probably not get them through grade school. But your basic question is valid. At this point in time, if we do not see decisive U.S. leadership during the course of this fall and winter that actually resources this strategy, it will be futile to go on with sort of half measures, with the type of level of effort which simply allows the Taliban to keep taking the initiative and win what is fundamentally a battle of political attrition. The question, though, that people tend to forget is, if, on the other hand, we then have to decide how to leave, every exit strategy has a destination. You have to go somewhere and reestablish a new form of security structure. In this case, if Afghanistan goes, it is very difficult to see how you secure Pakistan. People forget this.
But conversely, they say as long as the occupation is there in Afghanistan, it's very difficult to see how Pakistan can be secured. I mean, you can take it both ways, can't you? It is actually the war in Afghanistan that is destabilizing Pakistan.
You know, it's very interesting people say that, but you could also say that actually Zia began a process of destabilization in Pakistan, which has continued systematically as Pakistan's military and civil government has imploded around what is probably the only democratic feudal system in the world.
Right, but I mean, in some ways the best case scenario for Afghanistan, many will see, despite the best laid plans, might be a Zia option. The US supporting a strongman in Kabul to the hilt, and then we'll get this. I mean, it just seems terribly circular, all of this, as far as US policy in this particular region goes, although you have this marvelous plan for creating stability in Afghanistan.
We don't know, and nobody can make promises, that any type of counterinsurgency strategy works. There are too many variables. Is there a strong possibility that if it's properly implemented in resources, it could work? Yes, that's the case. But the problem we face in this region as an alternative is lasting instability. There's no strong man to rely on. If there was, we'd know the name, and nobody can name one.
But given that, then, given everything you said about the need for more resources for your plan to work, in the coming few months then, if Congress doesn't come up, and if Obama doesn't come up with the support that you feel General McCrystal requires, can you see yourself then saying, enough?
First, I have very clearly said that in my own writing, but I think it is also very much broader than that. First, it is Ambassador Eikenberry and General McCrystal. This has to be a civil military effort. And the focus on General McCrystal, unfortunately, is missing half of the U.S. strategy. But the second factor is, yes, you're going to have to adjust your policy in Central Asia. The difficulty is when you say get out, you don't really get out. You move to somewhere else in the region, you move to a different type of strategy of containment, and you begin the encounter and the tension and the clashes somewhere else.
But that would suggest this isn't then just about al-Qaeda getting safe haven in Afghanistan. This is about dominance of Central Asia and the other geopolitical issues involving Russia and China then, doesn't it?
Well, nothing is unconnected. I mean, that's like saying that this is over when you get bin Laden. It's always been sort of ridiculous.
So actually then, when Admiral Mullen says, look, our mission is to make sure al-Qaeda doesn't use Afghanistan as a safe haven, he's not being entirely honest. This, in the end, is about geopolitical strategy in Central Asia.
He's said a great deal more about strategy in Central Asia than that. So if you're going to quote him, please quote him in context.
Well, last week, though, when he was given, he wanted to succinctly express what the mission was. He said it's to defeat al-Qaeda and prevent it from having a safe haven in Afghanistan.
You don't write a novel in 150 words. So when you ask for a succinct answer, you're going to get a oversimplification.
But might he not also have said, and also to make sure that the U.S. has a footprint in Central Asia to counter the future threats in Russia and China?
I'm sure he would like a better speechwriter. You may really apply for the job. But the fact is that I think when you look at what the Joint Chiefs have said, it's always been, how do you deal with the interlocking problems of Central Asia? They obviously extend beyond Afghanistan, and they extend beyond Pakistan. There is a very serious problem to the north of Afghanistan, where you're dealing with dictatorial governments, remnants of communist states that have their own Islamist problems. You have, in many areas, an unstable belt within Iran and on its borders. These problems are interconnected with Yemen, with Somalia, with places like Algeria. So you are talking about three-dimensional chess. When you ask me to say, how do you summarize this in 100 words, it's not going to be a valid description.